As soon as I asked the question, bang! Like it was out of a cannon.
And at that point, I suddenly shook myself out because I realized that my wife would be told, or might not be if the system was kind, that David died naked under a desk with his helmet and body armor on with a goat.
Great to be here this afternoon in the To Be Limitless studio here with David Labouchere and myself. We're going to be talking about pivot or perish this afternoon. We've got clients from all over the world, and actually we've also got David's father, wife, and potentially his son here as well this afternoon. So absolutely fantastic that you're all joining us this afternoon for Pivot or Perish. So never a more relevant time to discuss Pivot or Perish than this afternoon, David. And we're going to start by thinking about mission. And mission's going to be pretty... it's an interesting topic. So the whole idea of a pivot, and when we're thinking about pivot, we're talking directly about changing the mission, maintaining the mission, changing the strategy. So the mission's not going to change, but the strategy that we use to deliver it is. So we're going to be spending a bit of time thinking about that this afternoon. But first of all, welcome. I think we went really well this morning. Our expectation is to be even better this afternoon.
And we will be. So, mission. First off, mission's a very specific word. But for all of us, we just need to think of mission as criteria for success. It can be called objective, it can be called goal, but in the military, it's a mission. Let's have a look at what our mission was in Iraq in 2006. Let's have a quick geography and history lesson.
Let's have a bit of a lesson. Always fascinating to have a lesson with you. So talk us through, so down here's Kuwait. Take us through the rest of this map.
Kuwait, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Basra, port city for Iraq, and up here is Baghdad. That's about 540 kilometers from Basra, the port city, to the capital. There's a line here. Some bits are very straight and some bits are very wiggly, and that is the border between Iran and Iraq. And on that border is a town called Al-Amara. Al-Amara is in the center of Maysan province. So these straight lines are not exactly normal, especially given that only 100 years ago, none of these were nation states. Instead, they were gatherings of families and tribes. And the British, in a piece of possibly arrogant colonialism, I know I've got a few Australians on this particular call, in a piece of arrogant colonialism, drew straight lines. Straight lines do not work when families and tribes are divided. And much of the warfare that took place between Iran and Iraq was a direct result of those straight lines from 1920, 100 years ago. So we move on and we zoom in on this area, and specifically the town of Al-Amara. Al-Amara. On the River Tigris, a fertile river with marshes to the south and desert either side. And the marshes then developed into the River Tigris, and the Tigris goes all the way up to Baghdad, getting bigger and bigger.
So tell me a little bit about this little tiny spot here. So how big is this little spot on the map?
Well, I don't know if you can even see it from Australia or the UK. But this little spot on the map marks roughly, because somewhere in the center of it, an area of about 3 to 4 football fields. And that was Camp Abu Naji. And Camp Abu Naji was a former Ba'ath Party prison, a hated area, because the Al-Amarans were not popular with Saddam Hussein. The Maysanis are a fiercely proud, culturally unique people. And they have more to do with the people on the other side of the straight line than they do with the people up in Baghdad.
So tell me about what they even did, what Saddam Hussein used them for during the war with Iran.
Well, these people were not his favorites. So what he did, and we're talking about a border which is just off the map on the right-hand side here, He would march the people of Al-Amara across the minefields unarmed so that they didn't lose any weapons in order to clear the minefields for his troops from Baghdad. Not surprisingly, the memories of these people were pretty poisonous when it came to 1991 and we invaded. And we invaded with a promise to remove Saddam Hussein in their minds, which we didn't follow through on, but they rose up with us in 1991 and opposed Saddam Hussein. We then left and left them to Saddam Hussein's wrath. So even after that, he stopped supplying the Meyzanis. He stopped giving any sort of state aid to Al-Amara, a city of 400,000 people who were now the poorest people in the whole of Iraq. Let's sit down and we'll move on.
Yeah, so I'm thinking a little bit about what you've spoken about here. So today we're talking about pivot or perish. So we're talking about maintaining a mission and changing the strategy. So when you were there maintaining that mission, what was the mission? In your head, what was the mission?
Well, the mission was probably quite ill-conceived because, first off, it involved democracy. And democracy as we, the Westerners, understood democracy, not as the people of this region believe in democracy. Now, if you give somebody a vote here, if you give a female in 2006 the vote, it's new, never been done before. So the first thing that happens is that she asks her husband, how should I vote? He says, wait, I shall ask my father how we should vote. The father says, son, wait, I shall ask the head of the family, your uncle, how we should vote. The uncle asks the tribal leader how the tribe is going to vote. The tribal leader asks the majlis of tribal leaders how they are all going to vote, and then they vote. That is a free vote in Iraq. That is their version of democracy. It's not ours. So the first thing was to build a nation with democracy, rebuild it from what were only ashes. Very, very poor people, very intermittent electricity supply, hospitals that were dilapidated and fallen down, schools that didn't work at all, and a police force that was completely corrupt. A young man would try to enter the police. He had to pay $1,000 US to even be considered. In order to gain $1,000, his family would sell all their assets to get him into the police. Why? Because a policeman is a rich man. And a policeman is a rich man who will support his whole wider extended family for the rest of their lives. Because policemen make a lot of money. They are not paid a lot of money. They make a lot of money. So we had this corrupt police force, and we were bringing what we thought was good police practice. And so I spent a lot of time giving out certificates, like on this picture, to newly qualified policemen who had actually bought their place in the police with all of their family's goods. So they gave up their whole herd of sheep in order to get one policeman into the police force. Now, the police force were government troops. On the other side in Al-Amara were the militias. They were normally at loggerheads with the police, but we gave them a unifying goal, and that was to get rid of the British, who, from about 48 hours after the invasion in 2003, liberation in 2003, about 48 hours later, we became occupying forces in their minds. They were again invaded. So we arrived with 800 troops into this tiny little area with a sandy bund around it. It was an oblong. It had a few concrete buildings with tin roofs, but otherwise it was just a sandy piece of desert. And it was summer, and it was getting hotter. Many people in Dubai will understand how unpleasant that can be.
I think even a few Queenslanders on this call will understand that as well.
So our job was not just to look after nation building in a democratic form, but also to stop the flow of arms, ammunition, and explosives that were coming in from Iran. Iran desperate to destabilize the Western coalition. And to do that, they moved weapons through a very porous border, albeit very mined border after all of the years of fighting, 9 years of Iran-Iraq war. And they knew the routes through, and they were moving large quantities of arms, ammunition, that then flowed through Meizan, through the area that we were tasked to stop, and up into Baghdad, where they were used to attack the American forces. The Americans saw us as a failing defensive position. Why? Because we were this 800-strong set of troops sitting in a little box outside a city of 400,000, all of whom were armed and all of whom hated us.
And so I think this is a nice juncture to stop here, because we're going to send some people out into some breakout rooms shortly, David. Tell me, because you had a large overarching mission that we now understand. One was, which was to nation build for the people of Iraq. Very noble. Two was to protect the Americans, essentially.
Yes.
From the flow of weapons in from Iran that then made their way to Baghdad. But you had an overarching in your mind as you spent all those months training and preparing. What was a key criteria for success for you?
It was unspoken, and it certainly wasn't official, but I was determined to bring every man and woman that I took into Iraq back alive.
Fantastic.
Now,
so that was interesting.
And let's face it, we were not just soldiers. When we arrived, we were given experts at police procedures, some of them American. From 23 nations, we had experts in hospital administration, in medicine, in school administration, in teaching. We had all the experts, and at times that 800 swelled to 1,400 people in this tiny little box of sand with a few hardened buildings and a lot of tentage. And those people were lovely. They were fantastic. They were amusing, they were brave, and they were mostly volunteering. Some of them were very amusing. This is the doctor's idea of fun. That's a man having a cigarette. And I made sure that they all joined in with everything that the battle group did. So, of course, me being me, and most of you understand, we all went running on a regular basis and stayed fit. They were the most amazing team of individuals, all of whom were doing this for the good of the country that we were in. And yet we were hated. So we went expecting to be received with open arms, and we discovered the Wild West. My predecessor was very quick to depart as soon as we arrived, and his last words were to me, "Keep your head down."
Yeah. And so in this time of unprecedented change and challenge for many people, and I know that many people on the call today are seeing this time as real opportunity, but genuine challenge as well. So we're going to send you out to a breakout room now.
I would like to say, just on the resource side, before we get to the breakout room, that I had soldiers, and we had the most wonderful civilians, and we had local people coming in from the local town who were also understanding, a few of them, that we were trying to do good. The last thing we had was money, oodles of money. In fact, this is a picture of my paymaster looking at the safe in my office, which at this point had $15 million in it. And it never had less than $10 million in it. So we had money, we had the wherewithal to deliver a functioning country, but we did not have the consent of the people.
Interesting. So thinking about those pieces about, and we're going to be looking at that later today as well, relationships and resources and how important those are as well. I'm going to send you out into a breakout room now. We're only going to send you out for 5 minutes. We'd like you to go out and think, given where you are at the moment, what's your mission? Yeah, and we'd like you to make sure that it is simple. Now, simple and easy are two different things, obviously. So Mubarak and Romwell are about to send you out into the breakout room. We'd like you to really think clearly around what your mission is. And we'll be asking a couple of questions when you come back. 5 minutes, you'll have 3 to 4 other people with you. Enjoy. It's our gift to you. When we talk about mission, David, and understanding it, we also have to take into account the environment in which we're doing things. So, and you heard Andrew just talk about how the environment matters as well. Your environment, interesting environment. We looked at the map. We've seen some pictures. So take us through the environment.
Well, it was this oblong, very tiny, jammed full of people, with guard towers on the corners that looked like this, barbed wire all the way around. It was just a bund of sand that we were using to protect ourselves. And when you flew in, you realized you were in the Wild West because there were pockmarks and bullet holes and large holes in the ground and destroyed buildings. And we had 16 of these, the British Army's main battle tank, and that was pretty well enormous. 70 tons of it, one of the most potent battle weapons in the world ever created. We had another 30 of these, and these are the Warrior armored vehicles, 15 tons of protected soldier carrying power with a very good cannon on the top of it. We had lots of armored taxis to move our soldiers around. And all this for a group of people who are delivering aid and nation building. The optics didn't quite work with the mission. And we had 800 of these. Probably the most valuable asset anybody has, in this case, was our men and women. And they are the bravest, best soldiers in the world. And I would say that, but I also believe it. And they were trying to defend themselves. They were only there most of the time to make sure that they survived. We had become so disconnected from our mission that we were, as I described it, a self-licking lollipop. So that's the environment. And not surprisingly, the enemy, the opposition, saw this little box as a target-rich environment.
As you said, shooting fish in a barrel.
We were fish in a barrel. It was so easy because they had control of the surrounding area. We had to fight our way in. We had to fight our way out. Just to get out of camp, we had to do a major operation, a battle group operation, an operation involving 500 people to get 3 police advisors to a local police station. And then they could only be there for a short amount of time because we could only secure our return route for a short amount of time because there were too many options for the opposition to attack us.
So what we're about to do now is we're about to send people back out to the breakout rooms, yes. Hopefully a little bit more successfully than last time without the same amount of barriers. And we're going to send you out to a new set of rooms. We're going to recreate the rooms and set you out to a new set of rooms. But what we're going to talk about there is in alignment with the mission that you just spoke about. What's your mission? Now, a simple mission. We're going to think a lot about what Marcus Buckingham describes in the book, The One Thing You Need to Know. He describes personal and professional success. The number one factor in sustained personal and professional success is to recognize your barrier, your number one barrier, and then ruthlessly eliminate it. A no prisoners approach to eliminating your barrier. So what we want you to think about is, right, if this is my mission at the moment, what do I need to do to eliminate the barrier, the number one barrier? And when some people will say, like we faced this morning, people said, Mick, there's lots of barriers. What we're challenging you to do is say, right, go above and above until you get to, that is my number one barrier at the moment. And we want you to think about what is that barrier? And then maybe start to have a think about, right, how do I ruthlessly eliminate it? What are some simple steps, once again, simplicity, that we can take to eliminate it? Once again, here's another gift for you. Some time with some quality people in a great breakout room. And I can see there's so many great people here. Have a think about it, because you never know who I'm going to ask to share what that barrier was and how you're going to eliminate it. Look forward to seeing you soon. We capture obstacles and having to understand it and what we look at. Now, the obstacles you were faced with in your 2 stated governmental missions and your 1 personal mission, quite interesting. Let's have a look at what were those obstacles.
Well, the first thing is I'd love you all to hold in mind what Mick and Ross have just agreed on. And that is your client and your people. And you'll see from the way we were tooled up to go to war, we might not have been that good at the client-facing piece. Because this is what they replied with. And this is a small mortar, probably a 60mm mortar. And what you may be able to see is the bright red pieces of molten and jagged metal that are flying out in every direction from this particular little impact that I'm showing a picture of. Now that was a small one, this is a big one, and this was taken by a returning patrol, and that explosion is taking place inside our camp on the 4 football fields that we occupied. And when one of these lands, and it's probably a 120mm mortar here, then you see total destruction, and this is one of the hard buildings in the camp that was hit by that particular explosion. Now, in terms of our people, our employee engagement, the soldiers found this rather unsettling. At all times, and you might think about what we have to wear in this country at the moment, you had to wear personal protection. A helmet and body armor, whether you were on duty or off duty. You didn't have to wear it, actually. We didn't ask anybody to wear it, but everybody wore it. Because we were being attacked from above. We were being bombarded with 120mm mortars and rockets. And these rockets come in at a lesser angle, but they still come in from above. So the problem was from above, and we didn't have any hardened overhead shelter. Instead, we put up blast walls, so that if the impact was close to you, hopefully you were on the other side of a blast wall. Here is a picture of a chap called Sergeant Trevor Gray, wonderful Queen's Roller Czar, and he is lying under his accommodation, as low to the ground as he possibly can be during a bombardment. And that little piece of paper in front of him is every one of his soldiers, those people that he was responsible for, and where they were in the camp at that moment. And he is waiting for any report that a bomb has landed on some of his people. That was his cross to bear. And this really sums up the feeling, the mood of those soldiers, because the anxiety, and anxiety as we know is uncertainty multiplied by powerlessness. The anxiety amongst the soldiers was palpable. We saw a lot of them at church on Sunday. They'd never been to church before in their lives. But somehow they decided to go to church on Sunday in that camp. And here we see a chap, he's sitting with his body armor on, a pair of shorts, a pair of running shoes, and he's just waiting for his number to be up, because it's coming from above and he can do nothing about it. Now, other people hid in different ways. This is a wonderful picture of our head chef and 3 of his cooks, and they felt that their best defense was in the rations room, because, of course, tinned peas are really good armor. And they are, actually, just as good as a blast wall if you put enough tinned peas between you and the enemy. And so they had their sacks of rice, they had the morning porridge, the tinned peas, and they got in there as deeply as they could during every attack. And frankly, unless that bomb landed smack on their heads, they were as safe as anybody in the camp. Sometimes the bombs hit accommodation. And this is a picture of part of the female accommodation, the officers' accommodation. There were 4 officers, 4 female officers in this Coromec. The Coromec is completely unarmored, but around it there are blast walls. And next door to this particular Coromec was another female accommodation with several female soldiers in it. The young captain woke up with this view from inside. Suddenly her sleeping arrangements had been disrupted. She woke up very quickly, And there were 38 penetrations in the mattress of her bed in which she was lying, and not one scratched her, not one touched her. She was within 8 feet of the impact. And yet the blast from that impact went straight into the female accommodation next door and caused several rather nasty injuries to her soldiers. So although she was closest to the blast, there was no rhyme or reason. There was no understanding of how this particular threat would actually pan out, even if it hit your own accommodation. You didn't know whether you would live or you would die, or the people that you cared for and were entrusted with keeping safe would live or die. Now this is an interesting one. You'll see a hole on the right-hand side of this particular piece of accommodation, and the 3 beds beyond should have a 4th just next to that hole. But what happened here is that rocket came from outside, hit low on the wall on the outside of that piece of accommodation, and went straight through the concrete floor and into the desert, destroying as it went the bed that was placed there. It didn't explode. This was just a dumb rocket that failed to explode, thank goodness, because frankly, the bed was completely mangled. And had this soldier actually been in bed and not on duty at the time, then he wouldn't be here to be smiling ruefully on this picture, because he got away with it. And after this, he said at the time, well, that's probably as close as it's going to be for me. 2 days later, in the same building, this happened. That's a hole in the roof. It's only a very flimsy piece of metal roof. That's another rocket that did not explode. It came through the roof and exited through the 3rd of those beds that you saw in the previous picture, and unfortunately exited through the feet of the soldier who was asleep in that bed at the time. And I'll leave that vision, and you can use your imagination as to the damage that a rocket will do when it comes through the roof and passes through the bottom end of your bed. So the anxiety...
This is interesting.
Yeah, the anxiety, it wasn't just for the soldiers. I got a bit anxious at times. And this is an interesting picture because this is the camp hairdresser who comes from Labouchere. We used local labour for a lot of things. And he was an interesting chap. And we realised that there was never, ever a bombardment when he was in camp. And what he was doing, he was casing the camp and then directing the fire when he was not cutting hair in the camp. And he began to know who we all were, and he certainly knew who I was. And as I was the least popular of a very unpopular lot.
And why was that? Because there's a really interesting insight into why you were actually so unpopular. And for anyone who rides with David in the morning, it wasn't because he was really poor at counting the number of sets we need to do. Where was that the source of that lack of popularity?
The local people, the local politicians, even those who knew that we could help them, were in a struggle in Labouchere. And they were in the sort of struggle that was about politics and corruption and control of the city. But for the time being, they needed rid of us. And so they made up stories. And they made up stories about us as a occupying force. And the leader of that occupying force, who was one Lieutenant Colonel Labouchere. And they decided that I had a large switch in my office, and they would point to it when these politicians came to visit me. They'd point to this old trip switch on the wall, which was not wired to anything anymore. It had been something else previously, but it was just a rusty old trip switch on the wall. And they'd point to it and nod and say, "That's it. That's the switch that switches off the power to the whole city." In other words, whenever I wanted to punish the city, I was cutting their power. Now, these are people that now had the odd fridge, and they could get fish from the river and put it in their fridge, and then Labouchere switches off their fridge, and the fish goes rotten. And they have no power for air conditioning, and they are busy buying in air conditioners because they never had this ability before. And yet the air conditioners had no power because Labouchere was cutting off the power. And this chap was head of the haters, the hairdresser, who was cutting the hair over the soldiers in the camp and mine on occasion. And so I found myself...
That must have been a fair while ago when you had hair to cut.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Anyway, so I found myself with my Glock 9 pistol, which is sort of next level pistol shit. And I found myself with it under my sheet, cocked and pointing as far upwards as I could as he got the cutthroat razor out to shave my neck. That's anxiety. If you ever have a hairdresser who you know wants to kill you and he's holding a cutthroat razor, that's anxiety. That is powerlessness and uncertainty multiplied. Now, actually, I had some other experiences which I'm going to recount, and one of them comes down to this chap. This is Ben. I named Ben after the outgoing battle group commander who had said to me, keep your head down. A very good friend of mine, a very tough soldier. But I named this goat Ben because Ben became my best friend. You'll understand, those of you that are CEOs, COOs, it's quite lonely sometimes being in charge. Hang on, this is going the wrong way. But anyway, this goat became my companion, and I would wander around camp with the goat at heel. And little did my soldiers know that I had a pocket full of those little sachets of poison that you can get in the coffee shop and you pour into your... So I had sugar in my pocket. And of course the goat ate the sachet and the sugar and thought it was wonderful. And the soldiers even joked, most senior officers have a Labrador and ours has a goat. Anyway, he was a wonderful goat. He was a fairly large goat. You can see here he's standing up front legs on a table. He smelt beautiful because he peed on his beard every day to ensure his smell. And he had a nicotine habit. He would empty all the ashtrays, and when he didn't get enough nicotine in the morning emptying the ashtrays, he got quite uppity. And I had a female political advisor out of Whitehall who was attacked from behind by this goat, who butted her, and she went headlong into a blast wall and had to be casevaced out. So it wasn't always the opposition in Alamara who were doing us damage, but on this case, it was Ben. Now, I got to talk a little more about Ben because one night we had a mortar attack come in, and I was lying a very hot night. It was July, and the first thing you heard was a huge whoomph as the first mortar landed. And on that night, they managed to deliver 54 rounds of mortars into the camp, 54 of those big bombs, in 10 minutes from 11 different firing points. And those of you that are sharp-eyed will realize that in the previous vision where that particular building was attacked, those 2 rounds came from totally different angles. In other words, 180 degrees. So they were encircling the camp with firing points and just lobbing everything they had into the camp. So my first reaction was to get off the bed and grab my helmet and body armor, because that's what we had to hand at all times. I wasn't wearing anything apart from helmet and body armor, and I climbed under the desk in my office, in my accommodation.
Sturdy desk?
No, a piece of plywood, but somehow that makes you feel a bit better. And I realize now just how debilitating it must have been in the First World War when bombardments went on for days. Because in those 10 minutes, I felt myself go from fear to abject terror. And the terror comes from the sound that those rounds make, because they stop making any sound about 7 seconds before the big explosion. 7 seconds to hope that you're going to hear the bang. Because if you don't hear the bang, then, well, that's the end. So as I lay with my bum sticking out and my helmet on, in abject fear, Ben the goat turned up in my accommodation through the curtained wall and took up a position of fear next to me. And at that point, I suddenly shook myself out because I realized that my wife would be told, or might not be if the system was kind, that David died naked under a desk with his helmet and body armor on with a goat.
Not quite the way you'd like to go. I'm sure not quite the way your dad would want you to go in.
No, he'll be listening to this and go, oh dear, yes. Anyway, so at that point I shook off that discomfort, and I got myself across to the operations center and helped where I could. But you can understand that the obstacles we faced can be summed up in consent. We had no consent. Our customer did not want our product.
And I think there's a really fascinating part to this too, David, because in coaching, which you and I work with a lot of clients all over the world around, there's two words that we listen out for. Always and never. This always happens, this never happens.
I've got a
pattern.
I've got a really good always for you. The only way we could get any supplies in to look after this huge number of bodies in this target-rich environment was to send a whole company of infantry armed to the teeth with those armoured vehicles down to the border, 120 kilometres south of us, to pick up a convoy and escort that convoy all the way back to us.
What always happened?
We got attacked. And we got attacked badly. So this is a truck that has been attacked by a roadside bomb. And when you're attacked with one of these shaped charges, that's molten metal traveling at 8,000 to 10,000 meters per second. It will penetrate anything, including our armored vehicles and including those armored trucks that I showed you earlier on. And of course, we don't get our resources when the trucks get attacked like this. They just burn and we leave them, or we pick it up later and bring the truck up. So the only way in and out was helicopter. That was the only safe way in and out. And even that wasn't particularly safe because this is the waiting area for the helicopter. And of course, that is a strike at the top of the waiting area from a missile. So for me, it was all about consent. And now I think we need to start thinking about changing what we were doing and reimagining the value.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're about to send you out into a room again. Have a bit of a think about where you are at the moment with reimagining your value. And I think this is a really, as appropriate as it is to reimagine your value in this situation, I also massively admire how you've reimagined your value during this period of time. Multiple people on this call join your virtual rides, your virtual boot camps as well during the week. So reimagining value. And I know we've also got Pete Turner on this afternoon's call and how we've reimagined our value as a business around our digital offering and how we've gone away and come up with a reimagined value so that we could point it in a different way. So when we think about a pivot, as we've already talked about, a pivot is maintaining the mission, yet changing the strategy. And in order to do that, you've got to be able to think about, right, this is the value I create. This is the unique value I create. And now I'm going to reimagine the way that I deploy that value. So when we send you out we're going to send you out for 5 minutes this time, I think, in a group. Reimagine your value. Yeah. So if this is me at the moment, how can I reimagine my value and point myself at a different target in a different way? So I'm going to send you out to think about your value in new ways. Have fun. Once again, our gift to you. David, reimagine value. I'm taking that this photo wasn't New Year's Eve, so reimagining the value was pretty important. So if we keep in mind the top line, the above the line mission and the below the line mission. So the above the line was nation building and stopping the flow of arms across the Iran border. And then, of course, the below the line mission, which was most important to you, was bring them all home. Bring them all home, which is, so important. So the pivot.
Well, yes, something had to be done. And my predecessor had stayed for 6 months. And yes, he lost people. He didn't lose people. The enemy got some of his people. And we were losing people injured. We lost 36 injuries during our time in camp.
And so we talk about always. Every night you were in camp.
Nearly 189 times, but sometimes it was day and night, and then we'd get a day off, and we'd all wander around thinking, is that it? Is it over? And of course it wasn't, and it never was, and it never would be. So I'd been hatching a plan for a while, and I had tried it through my chain of command to say, look, I'd like to do this. And I had a very loyal chain of command above who trusted and believed in me. But they had to take this decision up to London, and London, because we were in a coalition, had to take it to Washington, and Washington said, you cannot give up ground. You cannot give the enemy that position, because of course they will immediately have free rein just to bring everything through the back door and destroy the American forces in Baghdad.
And keep in mind that the US forces have always loved the idea of camp, haven't they?
They are very camp-based. They always bring in their own creature comforts. So in a US camp, you will normally have a McDonald's, for instance, in from America, full McDonald's, complete with queuing and the right tables and the right bits. And if you're lucky in an American camp, they give people choice. So they'll bring in a Burger King as well. So, you know, you've got choice. And the camps get bigger and bigger. And we had started to suffer from the same thing. We were a very big force, doing very little work, delivering few experts to police stations. And when we did, it was a battle group operation with tanks and guns and helmets and planning for weeks just to get 3 policemen into a police station, get some training done with the police, and then get out again. And I'm not sure if I tell the story, these police were way off the mark in terms of what we expect. We were trying to bring in the rule of law and due process. So we wanted to have a chain of evidence and people going to court. And then if convicted, people would then go to jail, perhaps, for their sins. And one day we had a murderer who had got angry in the heat and had shot his neighbor with a Kalashnikov from another family. And so we said to the police, right, you've got a chain of evidence. You've arrested a man for this crime of murder. It looks like an open and shut case, but we have to go through the process. And we explained the process up into court in front of a judge and to have an evidence trail. And the next morning I got a phone call and it just said, we let him go. And I was shocked. I said, why did you let him go? And he said, well, it's all sorted. And I said, what do you mean? Well, his family have promised to pay $5,000 American to the other family, and they've promised 3 women in marriage at a future time to the other family. Blood money was paid. That was all that could happen. So that was the problem we were up against, and we were delivering 3 men to a police station once every 2 weeks. We weren't even tickling the problem that we needed to solve in this part of the world. So I asked the chain of command if I could close the camp. And they said, well, how are you going to do your job if you don't have a base? And I said, we will become nomads. We will become Bedouin. We will disappear into the night. We have a huge desert. It's nearly 300 kilometers long, this province. It's 200 kilometers wide. Most of it is desert. We can operate from the desert. And of course, that went up the chain. And each time my very loyal superiors came back and said, I don't think they're going to say yes, David. In fact, they were saying no, but we were asking again and again above me. But I didn't know that they'd said no several times, and they were very bored of saying no to Labouchere. So one night I said, I'm bored of waiting for an answer, and I'm really bored of having these bombs land on my people. So we are going to leave. And the sun set on that camp for the last time, and we went out into the desert, and we sent our tanks south, and the tanks motored south and arrived in Basra. And my boss, a very good brigadier called Everard, said, what are these doing here? And they said, where is Labouchere? And the squadron leader said, I've no idea, he went into the desert. And at this point, I had created in the vernacular, a shitstorm. Because the message went up to the Americans went to Whitehall went to Washington, there were people flying backwards and forwards across the Atlantic, because we had given up the Americans' back door. We had exposed the whole mission in their minds, and the mission would now fail because one rogue commander had done something without permission. Now, we were now free. We were now in the desert. We took our helmets off most of the time. We took our body armor off most of the time. We had clear fields of view for miles and miles. Nobody could come close to us. We supplied ourselves using C-130s. This is Special Forces pilots with the RAF who could land a very large transport plane on an unprepared desert. And sometimes they wouldn't even stop. They would half land, touch and go, and shove the stuff out of the back as they're landing, and it would roll across the desert, and we'd be there to pick it up, take our supplies, and get on. And sometimes they would even stop, and it would be dead of night, no lights, just this roar of an aircraft coming in. You have to hope that you're not on the runway. And then you'd chase after it in your Land Rovers, go and put the bodies on that were going onto the aircraft, as in live bodies going home, and take new people off the aircraft and into your Land Rovers and get on with the job. And we patrolled the border. And we patrolled the border. This is...
famous photo.
It's a great photo. It was on the front page of the Times in early September of 2006. And it's Queen's Royal Hussar soldiers on foot patrol on the border of Iran and Iraq, making sure that arms and ammunition did not come into Iraq. And here is a cut-down Land Rover. We made these as light as possible. Actually, that's mine.
I can see you in the front. You look like you're having a terrible time.
Well, this was boys' own stuff. This was absolute nirvana. My father had taught me to drive in a Land Rover. And now, every time we got into a sticky situation, my driver would look across and say, I'm not going to get in the shit here. Colonel, do you want to drive? At which point I'd say, yes, I'll drive it. And I was just having a ball getting around the whole desert. And we traveled light with a much smaller force. We were only about 400 in the desert, having given up all those heavy armored infantry and given up our tanks. We were down to 400 soldiers.
But that wasn't the way it was viewed, was it?
Well, the joy of this is that we could travel so fast that reporters for the opposition were reporting back to Alamara that Labouchere and his teams had been seen in this area. And they might be riding a donkey into town, and it took them 2 days to make that report. And then at the same time, a chap with a phone would be reporting the same force, but he didn't know it was the same force, 200 kilometers away in the north of the area, or another 100 kilometers east in the east of the area. And the enemy, the opposition, the militias, never knew where we were, but assumed we were everywhere. And so they thought we had doubled in size, when in fact we were almost a third of the size. And now we were spending our time getting around to hospitals. We hid in the desert. Nobody could see us. We guarded ourselves. We administered ourselves. This is one of our soldiers using a Land Rover wing mirror to shave in the morning. He'll put the wing mirror back onto the Land Rover when he's had his shave. This is life in the desert. We were nomads. We were Bedouin, and it was a fantastic life. 12 hours sleep a night. And during the day, thrashing around the desert in high heat. It was 61.9 degrees at its hottest.
But tell me this, because I'm fascinated by this. So in the camp, how many on sentry? How many people guarding each night?
A company's men every night. 120 men guarding the perimeter, keeping the rest of us safe from ground attack. And it worked. Nobody ever attacked us from the ground because we had 120 men guarding us.
Tell me, in the desert, how many people on sentry?
One.
One person?
One with night vision goggles.
Pivot.
One person sitting up on a bund. Every 2 or 4 hours, he'd be replaced by another person. And that was the only demand that was not going directly towards the mission. That was our only protection.
And so tell me, because I'm really fascinated now, how many times were you attacked? How many times were you bombed at night in the desert? Never. Never at night.
And we never received any injury caused by opposition activity.
So, pivot. mission, mission maintain, strategy change.
Totally.
And so then I look at that, and then we ask, because I know that Tina's on this call, and we know what a champion of good sleep Tina is. So average sleep in the camp?
4 hours unbroken.
4 hours unbroken. Average sleep in the desert?
As soon as it went dark, we'd prepare for the next day and go to bed. 12 hours.
Okay. So there's a piece of that there. I think this is really important because, people can change their strategy, but if the outcomes don't change, then that piece is important. But when you do this, so there's some really good piece for the underlying mission. Tell us a bit about the above the line mission in terms of nation building, and also stopping the flow of arms.
Well, we took our helmets off for a start. A man with a helmet is pretty imposing. A man with no helmet is another man. Mm. And we engaged the local families, we engaged the local tribes. In fact, we traveled from tribe to tribe, talking to the elders, sitting in circles, cross-legged, agony for the modern Western man. And we gave them money and opportunity to be big in front of their families. Not surprisingly, they took the money and the opportunity, and yet none of it was misused. It was all applied to local schools and hospitals. And we saw immediately that we became accepted. We were not feeding ourselves now with a convoy of armored vehicles that took over the whole road for 120 kilometers. But instead, we were going to local villages and buying the bread from the ladies who were making the bread. So they were now cooking extra bread and we were buying it. Probably for an inflated price, it didn't matter. We were investing in the local people and they learned to love us and we were welcomed everywhere we went. And we started leaving our weapons in the Land Rovers. Yes, under guard, but we were presenting ourselves as people who were giving rather than protecting ourselves or being a threat.
And what did some of that giving look like? Yeah.
Well, this is a picture of one of our females, but of course, there was a huge need in this highly oppressed, 20 years of oppression area that Saddam Hussein had left to fester. And so the women had no health care. We had our medics delivering babies in makeshift hospitals. We had a school team who were bringing the buildings back, the physical buildings back, but also teaching regiments back to schools. And this is typical. Whenever we went anywhere, they dressed in their finery to welcome us. And these are kids and actually my driver on the left and another soldier from the Queen's Royal Hussars on the right. But we were welcomed everywhere, and suddenly the whole mission became easy, just easy. Because we had got rid of the baggage and we had earned the consent. We had engaged our people who loved it out there. These soldiers didn't want to go back to Basra, where they would be put on guard duty, even during their downtime, because everybody had to do guard duty. These soldiers wanted to stay in the desert. And I must admit that I had difficulty leaving the desert too, to go back for instructions, etc. Especially as every time I went back, I was questioned by some very high-ranking people about what I was doing and why.
So when you were in the camp, how many of your soldiers, as they finished their tour in the camp, how many asked to stay?
Oh no, everybody wanted to leave. There was no sense that anybody wanted to be there.
In the desert?
Oh, they wouldn't leave. Okay. This was boys' own stuff. We were welcome wherever we went. We were ostensibly delivering the good things that we were there to deliver. I still had $10 million in my Land
So
Rover.
you could afford some bread.
And we weren't short of bread. We weren't short of fuel. We would buy a whole tanker that was coming across that illegal border, because I didn't try to stop all traffic across the border. This is trading nations. They've done trade for 4,000 years through that area. What I did was I asked the local tribal leaders to stop the supply of arms and ammunition. We didn't try to do it. We asked them to do it for us. And of course, because we were delivering good, they said, this is a fair trade. We will stop anybody trafficking arms and weapons, but we won't stop the fridges. We won't stop the air conditioners. This is modern trade. We won't stop the carpets, old trade. We won't stop the spices. We won't stop the drugs. All that will continue because it's lucrative. And our view was, fine, just don't let any bombs or bullets go through. Now, there's an arms souk in Alamara.
And this was a great metric for you.
Well, it was the only metric.
Yeah.
Because how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that you stopped all the weapons coming in? And the way we proved it was to go into Alamara quite shiftily, like we would try to dress locally and get in and out because he'd never actually survived very long locally. But we'd go in and we'd check the price of weapons in the arms souk. Because in Alamara, it's not about who has the nicest car. It's not about who has the latest laptop. It's all about who's got the latest gun or bomb or RPG-7 because everybody's armed. So there's an arms souk. And the cost of a Kalashnikov when we arrived and when we were being attacked was $150. That's an AK-47. The cost when we went onto the border was up to $1,500. And those were hard to find. And you couldn't get an RPG for love of money. They just weren't available anymore. So we knew from market forces that we were doing the right thing, and we had certainly disrupted the supply to a significant level. And that was our task. And the American intelligence reported back through the chain that somehow, even though the Brits had let us down again, somehow the supply of weaponry had dried up.
So there's delivering on the American part of the bargain as well. But then I love this next slide because it represents what I feel like you felt like you were truly there to do.
Yep, this is me back to school, about 35 years on, sitting at a desk in a working classroom in a school that hadn't been working 3 weeks before we got into the desert. And this is my one of my operations officers. This man actually earned a military cross in those first 4 months of us being in the country, and for bravery in battle while we were trying to deliver aid and trying to do good to this country. He earned a military cross for bravery. You shouldn't be able to earn a military cross when you're delivering good things to people. This is a playground 20 years since it had last been used when we got to it, and we rebuilt it, and the playground and the amenities in this particular village were rebuilt completely by our engineers. And this is the most important piece. I was always blamed for switching off the power in Alamara. We returned power to Alamara 24 hours a day while we were in the desert by rebuilding, using military engineers, the whole electrical grid for Meizan. And now, and ever since we were there, they've had a few more hiccups, but ever since we were there, they've had 24-hour electricity. There is no doubt that the pivot worked in this case. And we left a country, frankly, that could govern itself. It didn't do it peacefully because there were still the government forces versus the local people, but at least we delivered quality of life for a huge number of people in that region.
Yeah, fantastic, David. It's such a compelling story. But the piece that I love is around here's the mission and here's our initial strategy isn't working on the two above the line metrics and on my key one below the line metric. And then to pivot and change and then so dynamically impact on, because that's a big piece about what we're going to send people out to have a discussion about now is, right, what's your pivot? You know, and you heard Lou talk before around, okay, I'm a person who's delivered outstanding training
in a classroom.
And that's not a thing anymore. Okay, so what are we going to do? What can we do different? What can I do? This is still my mission because I'm passionate about it. I love it. How can I reimagine the value and now pivot and turn and create value on a level that creates this sort of impact and the sort of value that I want to create? So it's a really interesting question. So we're going to change up the groups again. We're going to send you out with some great people again. There's some great people in the room. I'm going to give you the opportunity to have a discussion about, right, what does that pivot look like? And we were lucky enough this morning to have a guy on the call, a client of mine who, through this challenging time, had been last on, first off.
Lost his
job, a high-profile job. And through his commitment to his mission and his ability to change his strategy to get there, he's got into a role that's now, well, at least on one of the metrics, paying more than it was before he lost the job. So that opportunity to pivot is out there. And I think about what the great work, the enormously fantastic work that the superstar Peter Turner has delivered through our 2BAPC program, and how he's delivered that great value. It'd be super if he'd do a bit more work rather than play as much golf as he does. But in that said, worth every greatest decision I've made professionally. Peter Turner, superstar. And how he's pivoted 2BAPC from a classroom program to a digital program that's now had clients from 9 different countries during this challenging time. So when we send you out, we want you to think about your pivot. What does that look like? We're going to send you out for the same amount of time, and understanding that you may not have completely created it in that time. Probably you haven't. But starting to put those seeds in, because it was in one of these breakout rooms that Peter and I had the seed of, let's do something differently with 2BAPC. Let's approach this. Let's have a different approach. And Martin Garvey, the mighty Martin Garvey, and Scotty Waygart, who was on a call with us last week, was the guy that started that green seed, those green shoots that turned into this. So this is your opportunity to think about a pivot. When we come back, we're going to have another little bit of a discussion, and then we're going to break out into some different things. So on your way, once again, pleasure to have you with us here today, Pivot or Perish. I was on a call with a great young agile CEO in London yesterday, and great session with him. And he said, Mick, I've loved this call. And I said, why? And he said, he spoke about the idea that if you think the next 2 years are going to be plain sailing, you're probably on the wrong call. Yeah. So, and I think that there's a fair bit of truth in that around what we're looking to do around this pivot or perish piece as well. So, in a moment, Romwell's just going to zoom in a little bit on to what we've got on the screen. Each of you, I believe, last night would have received a document, and it was our pivot or perish framework. Now, today's session also comes with certification and CPD points for those key learners out there as well, provided you complete the framework. Now, this piece is around, and a lot of it you've already highlighted, so it's just an opportunity. What gets written gets done, and you can expect to improve around the stuff you can inspect. So what gets written gets done. This whole idea of what is my mission? What's the ultimate value I bring? So in terms of the value I bring, which is key, and then the barriers that I need to eliminate. And you just heard PA speak about, tell me, what's the pain point and how do I remove the pain? How is that pain removed? And then thinking about the reimagined value that I want to create around that. And we go back to what David did so expertly in reimagining the value in order to deliver, maintain the mission, but just have the strategy be different. What do I want to point it at? Understanding what I want to point it at. And you heard Lou speak about before what she is thinking about pointing her reimagined value at. and the challenge that comes with that, but also the opportunity that comes with that. And then you get into a space where you need to understand what success looks like. What is your criteria for success? What does success look like? Because if you can't define what success looks like, it's very hard to be successful. So when you were able to define that success, David, was really clearly, did everyone make it home?
Yep.
Everyone made it home.
They did.
Fantastic. So what does my nirvana look like? So what does heaven on earth look like to me? So being really clear about, as PA spoke about as well, what we want that to look like. And then as you go through this document, you'll also see, right, what are my steps? What do I think the steps are to do that? And then as we go down through it, what are the key relationships? What are the key resources? And you heard David speak about some of the great resources that he had in order to deliver on that. And then there's some pieces around key takeaways for you that, Socrates said learning is remembering. That's all that it is. So what are the pieces that I need to remember and think about when it comes to my pivot and what that looks like? And that might be personal, it might be professional. It can encompass anything that is truly important to you in maintaining your mission. So in completing this document, and you'll notice that we put it in word form, and because the future belongs to both and, not either or. You might want to change the questions. That's great. Super. Maintain your mission. The strategy you can flex around. That's terrific. So we've now got about 10 minutes to go. So we want to throw this 10 minutes over. We want to throw it over to you. But instead of doing my usual thing, which I'm renowned for, throwing people under the bus, I'm going to ask the first question to David, and then we'll open it up. You can just throw your hands in the air if you've got a question. We'll come to you and ask for a question because we can see all of you on the screen. Some of you really great heads for radio. Some of you doing really, really well. So in terms of David, when I think about this, I think there's a big piece around mission command. So I'm going to get you to talk about.
It's a
in a really simple way, because I know
mission command. It's an absolute favourite of mine, and it works very well, I think, for everybody on this screen. Giving people your intention, what you want to achieve, training them sufficiently so that they can achieve it, and then giving them the resources so that they can go forward and do it their own way. Don't tell people how, just tell them why.
Yeah, and the platinum rule around that as well, isn't it? Don't
Absolutely.
treat people the way you want to be treated. Treat them the way that they'd like to be.
So it's the training and the resources. Give them the training, then you can trust them. Give them the resources, they can do the job. Step back and refocus on somebody else.
A great CEO that we work with, had a session with earlier in the week, and his name's Sam Instone. Many of you know him, and Sammy, superstar, runs a great business here. And the thing that we settled on was, I trust you, I think you're smart, let me know how you get on. Great pieces of language when you're leading great people. I trust you, I think you're smart, let me know how you get on. It's a great way to lead people. Okay, does anyone out there have a question for David who'd like to throw their hand up for any questions for David, any insights that you're interested? Ross, hand up in a flash. Roscoe, question, mate?
Thanks, Mick. Brilliant session, guys, I have to say firstly. Apart from the bizarre footwear you both had on, I think it was really
Seriously, you're giving us fashion advice. Thank you very much. That's fantastic.
Question to David. You talk about strategy and you talk about what you did, but my question is, what are the key things that you need to get right in your strategic planning for it to be a success?
Okay.
Principles or rules or...
Yeah, this is almost it's too easy, because there are 10 principles of war, and I live by them, and I think, if not you, others in this group have heard me talk about this. The first principle of war is selection and maintenance of the aim. What is it we have to achieve? What is success? And spending time on selecting the right aim will save you all sorts of pain when it comes to the plan. And I tend to say to people, I want you to spend 90% of your time selecting the right aim and only 10% planning to get there. But what organization does that? All of your organizations will spend 10% of the time having a quick chat about what do we want to achieve, bang, let's do that. And then you muddle around for weeks and months trying to find a strategy that will get you to that rather poorly selected aim. So selection and maintenance of the aim would be my number one takeaway for anybody who is trying to be a strategist.
And I think this is a really fascinating point, because McKinsey have said this at the moment. Get on your trajectory. Be clear about your aim, and be clear that you can iterate once you're on it. So if you've selected well and you're on that trajectory, the iterations will come.
Yeah.
The iterations will come.
And applying that to the situation that we've just been talking about, and yes, we've used my experience in Iraq as a vehicle. Applying that, we had plans, and we had plans from which to deviate. But actually, when you look at the original aim, it was poorly thought out. Delivering a democratic country in that region with the situation that existed after the invasion of 2003 was clearly a poor goal, and it caused us a huge amount of heartache.
Fantastic. Does anyone else have a question for David that they'd like to ask? If that's the case, there's a couple of things that I'd like to do before we finish. You'll notice some notes on the side. I know that Ross has shared a couple of articles on the side as well. I'm really thankful to David today. I feel like you've done a great job as always. I'd like to remind you that we've given you an activity to complete in order to get the certification for today and the CPD points that go with that. We'd like to see your Pivot or Perish framework, and we'd like to see it arrive. And with that, David and myself will also spend some time with you talking about what that looks like. That's included in being part of this Pivot or Perish event today. We'd like to thank you. I know multiple people have joined from all over the world today, from the UK to Australia. Even Scotland joined in today as well. I'm really also delighted to have been on a call with 3 generations of your family.
They've never heard this story, so I've been delighted to tell it.
To share that's something special as well. We're to be limitless. We care about our clients. As Ross said today, incredibly important at this time to be client focused. This Thursday we have a session around rituals hosted by one of our coaches, Neil Munro, in the Thursday session between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. GST. Those sessions are complimentary. They're here to create value for people. We're really thankful for the time that you've spent here today. It's a true privilege to share time with David, but also to serve the multiple great clients and the many members of our team that have joined today's session as well. So thank you very much. Have a great day. What remains of it, and pivot is the big message from David and I. Thanks so much for joining us.